Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Digital Services Forum. Today, we're going to go in, I think it's one of our first times actually speaking about HR. We have a special guest today that's going to take us through transforming HR service delivery. And if I could ask you guys, one of you guys from ServiceNow, if you could let people in, that'd be great. There's more people coming in a little bit later. We always like to tell people if this is your first time, make sure you go ahead and introduce yourself on the chat because we keep a really active chat here. And a lot of times, one of the big benefits of this meeting is you meet other people that are doing what you're doing. But make sure that you let everybody know you're here for the first time, if you are here for the first time, or just to say hello to those that are joining us. On the bottom, there's a link, and I'm going to put this link. I always put it in the chat afterwards. But there's a link that gets you to all the resources of the Digital Services Forum. There's four main things that you're going to see there. One is going to be access to the instance. One is going to be access to these Zoom meetings. We'll invite you every other week when we have them. Another one is going to be access to all the information. You'll get information today that we share, whether it's a presentation or some files, maybe even some code sometimes. And then the last thing you'll get is access to an instance should you decide to come in and use some of the things that we're showing you. So we try to provide as much as possible to help you be successful with ServiceNow. Our agenda for today is we're going to start off. Joe is going to be our presenter today. He is a certified technical architect, I think recently, and he can tell you more about his role. But his job is primarily focused on HR, if not exclusively. And I'm going to do a little section for you today before I hand it over to Joe. But we want to take you through whether you're using ServiceNow today or you're involved in ServiceNow today with HR. We want to make sure that we give a little bit for everybody. So Joe's going to start with a high-level overview. He's going to see a lot of people transition. They were working on ITSM, and now they work on HR and ITSM or HR exclusively. So we'll make some comparisons there because we know most people have that ITSM background. I go through some data architecture and then some maturity models, which are the big things to get started. Now, what I'm going to do, Joe, before I hand it off to you, I'm going to go through just a couple things. I always share this deck at the end. And at the beginning of the year, we made a big commitment to split what we're doing across these different categories. So there's 6 portfolios that ServiceNow delivers products in. So we take our 6,000 or 7,000 developers, right, and we split them across these areas. The area we're going to talk about today is the human resources portfolio. And what I did is I gave you some slides here that are just on HR service delivery. So when you come down and you want to look, and you might hear Joe talk about case and knowledge today or employee relations, you'll be able to click on these and then come back to the HR slide. So this is just an overview of the HR capabilities. For those of you that have been on the calls before, I shared these for other products we've talked about or other portfolios we've talked about. This is the HR one. So it has all the most up-to-date information for Yokohama. And this way you can take that back and use it internally. I know people like to steal a few slides from here when they're talking about something to other people in their departments. Okay, so I'll make that available to you. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to our guest speaker today. Is going to be Joe. And Joe, you're just going to take share over, right?
Yeah, that's just how I was going to take care of this. Give me one moment.
You should be able to share now, I think.
It's always making sure I pick the correct monitor is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, you Mac users.
All right. So, John, here's get confirmation. This is my favorite question. Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
Excellent, sir. So, hi, everyone. This is my first time here, so it's great to meet you all. So my name is Joe Fiedler. I'm what we call an advisory solutions consultant with our we call core business workflows, also employee workflows. So this is everything. I cover everything around HR, workplace, health and safety, talent development. So a lot of those inward-facing applications for your employees outside the IT scope. I have been on these within the ServiceNow ecosystem for 10 years. I actually started as a customer, originally actually as an IT service desk lead. And then I worked my way up to being a platform owner and developer, consultant, doing implementations in the public sector, and then finally here with ServiceNow. So it's been a very long and somewhat diagonal career for me. I'm certified in implementation across many solutions. And as John mentioned, most recently was May of last year, I was also certified as a technical architect. So I like to do this next slide in every presentation I do. Let me make sure I get all my things up and working. Sorry, John, I got to clear all my troubleshooting screens from trying to get logged in here. So my favorite slide, the one that makes the lawyers happy, just a quick safe harbor notice. We may contain forward-looking statements, especially if we get into questions around where things are going. This is all based on information and assumptions that are currently available to us. And then let's talk about what we're covering today. So with this transformation, transforming your HR journey, and probably for many of you, this might be your first time hearing about HR service delivery and ServiceNow, very much, what is it? What isn't it? So doing a bit of those comparisons of, where do they not only, share, but where do I have to either, kind of delineate my thinking, or I often say, just tilt your head a little bit to the side, and there you might see where the commonalities lie. The other piece we want to make sure we cover with this is data models. We have a lot of platform owners, a lot of architects on the call. So, what do cases look like? What are other tables we need to consider as we're thinking about the solution and where it fits? And organically, that leads us to the other part of this. Where does the HR fit with the common service data model? And actually, this is a commonly overlooked area during HR implementations. And then speaking of implementations, we'll cover like an implementation order, like if depending on my outcomes, what am I trying to do? And how does I also use that to help guide my maturity on the platform? Just quick note check, John. I haven't missed anything on the agenda. Got it all covered?
Looks good.
All right. Thank you, sir. So with that, let's start with talking about HR and IT. So I lifted two pieces from kind of that top level documentation. ITSM, this is the common outcome statement. We want to increase our productivity, resolve issues fast, improve user satisfaction. If it's broken, I can fix it and everyone's up and working. If they need something, I can get it to them quickly. And HR is very similar. We want to standardize documentation, interactions, and fulfillment and improve efficiency and our services over time. So there is that same kind of similar drive to what you want to do between HR and IT. And even if I lifted this from our value team, if we're talking about with IT service management, these are some common objectives you typically hear. I hear talking to customers, or I heard talking as a consultant, I want to optimize, I want to increase productivity. We're dealing with a lot of sources of data, a lot of employees that are constantly making more incidents. Everybody's forgetting their password. And I ultimately want to know where in ServiceNow, where can I find the solution capabilities to optimize, anticipate, and deflect. And if we go to this next slide, we see HR, those objectives, in spirit are very much the same. Optimize and improve productivity. I'm dealing with complexity. I am dealing with employees who are not informed, so they keep opening questions, tickets, cases, so to speak. And we look to similar kinds of solution capabilities. So I need to make sure I'm prioritizing, I'm routing correctly, we're automating, we're making sure it's a good experience. These are common objectives they both share. But this often leads us many times to also thinking, oh, so HR and IT implementation is going to go very much the same. Their structure very much the same, right? Yes and no. And this is where we're going to kind of start getting into some of those differences. So I want to start with one thing, give a little bit of a upfront terminology, and then we're going to do a little light demo to help showcase how they're together, but also where they may diverge and be a little bit separate. So let's talk about HR terminology. So a case, this is very much, when an employee is contacting HR and I'm needing to do something. So this is your task record, i.e. your incident, i.e. your request, written, whatever, that you're using to, track all your work against. And underneath that, you're driving additional different types of HR tasks as well. So this is those, basically workflowed out different steps that people need to complete. This sounds familiar, probably, very much like your IT catalog, where I have my requested item and I have all my catalog tasks lined up underneath it. That's driven by that workflow. It's the exact same concept, it's just on different tables. Another piece of this calling out is what we call an HR profile. This is not a user record. And we'll get into how it relates to it, but this is where HR is storing my PII, basically. things above and beyond my name, but like personal contact info, my home address, my phone number, even my tax ID in an encrypted field. That is all stored in a separate table to keep it off the user table and secure that level of access. You have what we call HR services. This is where I'm talking this more from a technical point. This basically defines and shapes what does case creation start with, where does it come from, and where does it go. This is effectively our fulfillment definition. If I was to compare this to the IT side, this is where we start to look at it like, this is the flow that I assign to my catalog item configuration on the IT side. Record producers, and this is often a nuance of terminology. We all know everybody calls anything in a catalog item. Well, technically, you have both a record producer, catalog items, and there's a third lesser known of those HTML items that you can put in there as well. But this HR is largely driven by record producers, where they're creating records directly on that case table. They are not using that request rhythm catalog task structure you see on the ITSM side. And then finally, something we call COEs, or centers of excellence. This is extensions of that case table, and they're basically tasks that are organized around functional disciplines. And I'll get a little bit deeper into this, but effectively, these are case types. I may be doing something in payroll, which needs to be separated from benefits, which needs to be separated from employee relations, for example. These are distinct disciplines in HR. Just like in IT, you may have something like, I have my server administrators, but there's Linux admins, Unix admins, Windows admins, not to forget them. So this is where we're starting to think about, where do these different types of records go and where we're storing that data. So with this up front, I do want to jump into a little bit of a light demo, just kind of look at how they live, how they live together in an environment, what they look like from that user experience perspective, both as employee asking for help, but also, those of you that might help them with all the different requests, both on the HR and the IT side. There we go. So an example here, I'm an employee, so I'm going to hit a portal of some kind. This is an example of our employee center portal. So the objective here is, this is my digital front door. Anything I can or need, within this organization, and I've seen the previous videos, many of you have seen these different kinds of portals, but very much this idea of everything IT is right alongside HR. So I have both solutions within my organization here running in the same instance. They are touching on the same portal. And you can see, I can come in here and do things like, do I have, access issues? I'm going to go do the classic, I have a password problem, ticket that IT always gets, was always looking to try and deflect. This type of form should be very familiar with you on the IT side. So I'm going to do something, I need my, let's just say my Figma password reset. Maria works with something with web development, but this is where I'm putting in these common requests of what we need. Lo and behold, we create an incident. It's eventually going to get assigned to somebody. If we're really mature, it may be automated. It may even go through things, using let's check and make sure Figma is up before we do anything with the ticket and so forth. And then just on the other side too, there's that practice of, like, if Maria asked for a new laptop, this would be a request instead. We're following that ITIL or IT for IT service modeling, to determine what kind of tickets we're doing. On the other side of this though, if I wanted to do something, we're talking about HR. So let's say Maria had something benefits related that she had asked a question about. It's the same idea, same experience for her as that end user. I just want to ask a benefits question. This common one is open enrollment, for example. This should all look very familiar. Just because I'm in another solution doesn't mean the front end experience changed. This is still a catalog item, a record producer technically here, with variables, with questions. They're built all the same way. But what happens here is, this is going to open something on one of those HR case tables. In this point, this is probably either the benefits case table, or it might just be the high level, general case table as well. But you can see that experience is still the same. We're still assigning numbers, states, statuses. So on the back end, for those fulfilling anything that Maria needs help with, here's IT, Sam, my IT admin, he's looking at, different things, within his workspace. So you can see this overview of what's going on, all those classic details. Are we currently in progress? Am I doing anything to this? Are we associated to this problems, major incident records, change requests? He's using all this to work for it. And this should be very familiar for many in IT, even if you're using the older, classic database view experience. I can still see all this stuff. This should be pretty much, I think, review for many of you. But what does this look like from the HR side? where I'm looking at this experience from the perspective of Harry, who works in human resources. He has a workspace too. Here's all his cases. And notice, again, similar type of data. It looks very similar. We have states, we have, who it's for, who it's about, things like that. We're having tools, the activity feed. So there's a lot of similarity here. It's just a matter of where this data and information is going. I want to pause here for a moment. John, either if you have any comments here you want to add based on what I'm showing on these experiences, or if there's any questions that are in chat or from the group that they want to pipe in about.
No questions yet, but I wonder if anybody just drop in the chat, how many people are using this HR agent workspace? Just say yes or no, or because I'm wondering how many people are using workspaces versus the old views. It looks like about one in 5.
Yeah, a lot of people, people like classic cars, they like classic forms, they're going to still, I think many people are still using, even customers I work with and talk to, or I implemented for, yeah, the workspace is nice, but we really like the old form view, so, coming into that classic, here is, what it looks like, the original way before we went to, not even going all the way back to, pre-UI 16.
Yep.
So I think a lot of customers, I think probably most people, they're probably looking at, their cases, their IT tickets, something in this view for the most part.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely some OCM in there coming up, and it's
Ooh, okay.
we'll use it or trying to use it. They're trying to get there, right? That OCM
Yeah.
is the tough part, though, for the people that have been in those old ones.
Yeah. And this is always, especially when I was doing a lot of implementation, I was very much the technical side, either directly hands on keyboard writing code and doing configurations, or more consulting. It was like, it's great that we're building this. Are we talking to the end users about this change? Are we training them? It's technology is only one leg of that stool. You still have the people and the process side that need to be tended to as well. Otherwise, the whole stool just tips over.
Yep. And I think people made the change on Employee Center more. As everybody in the old portals or new portals? The old HR portal or?
Boy, I hope they're not in the old HR portal. That got deprecated almost 8 years ago.
Well, I was just meeting somebody yesterday that's still in the old HR portal. So.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know maybe some people are still in that classic SP service portal. This is not, there's nothing wrong here.
Yep.
Kind of in being here, the direction is where when new customers are coming on, where new product development is being done. Sure, this portal will be here. Everything you see in Employee Center, this is still service portal. It's part of that tech stack. So no wheel is necessarily being reinvented. It's just a way of we're pre-staging up for you out of the box, add some additional capabilities, mostly around content management. So there's that ability with like Employee Center Pro, like those banners, this piece here, driving things like microsites. That is where you're getting more into that experience element, which, by the way, helps with OCM. If it looks good, people will arrive, to where, you have a more modern and engaged type of experience rather than it's just, a web page where I grab services and get help. But of course, make the determination based on your organization to what that best fits as well.
And it was like when a lot of people go to Employee Service Center, it's their first experience with AI search too, which is a big transition. That search experience is where it all starts. So.
Yeah. So talking about that, like if I ask, like I'm doing the kind of way we're starting to search now, just asking a question, what is my compliance training policy? So AI search is going to grab and order all these based upon what's there, telework policies, required compliance training courses, even try and elevate things for deflection upwards. But here you can see an example of, here's Gen AI in action, what your slide was up front. No one wants to read a 15-page document on what the compliance training outlines. I would rather just read the one sentence thing and move on with my day, save my time there for sure.
I guess the two big things here experience-wise, because we're talking about transformation today, are one, the fact that it's a seamless experience between IT and HR, and two, the big transition in search and content accessibility Okay.
Exactly. And it's really about, especially both of them have the objective of self-service. Can my user find what they need without opening a ticket or a case or having, it sounds terrible, having to engage a person? Because if the information's out there, we want them to find it. Its purpose of being out there is to, not just deflect tickets, but to make sure your employees are informed, they're happy, they're worrying about what their main primary job duty is or mission or whatever they're working on.
And Lou says, would it be more ideal to add the HR portal to a mega menu, HR along with IT and others, or employee center? So all employees are going to one location for everything.
Yes. And so it's often a common pain point, and it was even, there's always that discussion you have, do we want to separate IT and HR into separate portals? You can. There's advantages to that. Each is going to really like logically delineating their governance of what content's there and what's going to show up there. But for your employees, it may be a less than ideal experience. So I know as that employee, I don't work in HR and IT. I might be, just, somebody, out on the floor somewhere in accounting, doing that type of work. And for me, excuse me, and for me, I know it's one spot to find everything I need. So, okay, I have an HR question, cool. I can Amazon shop it, I could search it, or the same thing with IT, even building services, health and safety, all of that information.
Very cool.
So, and kind of talking to that, one thing I do want to call out here, this is a user experience taxonomy. This is not your common service data model taxonomy. Don't make that mistake. Because if you try and organize this by what you do in CSDM, your users are going to go, what the heck is this stuff? This is not what we call it. This is not what I know. It's just like everyone knows that an Active Directory password is more commonly called my Microsoft password or my network password. You want to make sure you're using language to meet the user where you're at. Just your EC Employee Center Pro tip for the day. Speak the language the users speak, not necessarily what you as IT speak or even what you as HR speak. So I think, kind of touching on that, why don't I hop out of demo land here and let's go and talk about some of the data models in play behind the scenes. Bring this guy back up. So, of course, when we start talking about this, we're touching on task records, we're touching on information for users, information related to said users. There's plainly going to be data models in play here we have to think about. The key one that kind of is that real crux of HR service delivery is what we call the centers of excellence. So these are all those case types. So this is where I'm dividing out. It's not just, an IT, you have an incident, but you kind of categorize it in a certain way of where it's going ultimately. Within HR, there's a larger complexity array of data that needs to be there, and they're separated out into those different disciplines. So like employee relations here down in this corner, they're going to handle different things than, let's say, the talent management team who handles onboarding. This is all labor grievances, harassment, misconduct, ethics, those kinds of things. Well, this is more about onboarding an employee. I have a question, new hires, offboarding, promotions. So very different disciplines, even within HR. You'll have separate teams, separate individuals handling that. So the data model is built as such to where, all right, instead of trying to cram everything on one table, let's extend it and put specific information out there. And there is kind of an underlying categorization data model you need to think of with all this. So when we have a center of excellence, that is your top level of how all those services down there at the bottom are grouped together. So that is your biggest net, kind of was describing, employee relations, talent management. You can see some other examples here. But then often we have to deal with that, okay, how do I start to categorize, subcategorize, and then get to the point, as they say. So this is where I want to take like topic categories. What is it? Is it, are we talking benefits? Are we talking dental? Are we talking retirement? So this is a way of how you start to layer those specific pieces down to what we call the HR service. And this is really what defines what happens. And by doing it this way. So when a user goes to, like Maria did the benefits inquiry, that has a defined HR service, which has a defined category in detail, which goes to a specific COE. So instead of having the user pick all those, just by going to that right-end service, everything's already defined out. So this is where I can drive that workflow, assign to who needs to take it, making sure that we have all of this information there set up and ready to go. And kind of some examples of like looking at this with the overview. This is where I'm defining all these records on these tables, so rewards, benefits, medical benefits, HSA inquiry, that's one way of working down this. Just slide here is just kind of show you like what layer of thinking you're starting to look at with it. But then here's a more defined one too. So like we could say payroll admin handles all my direct deposit setups, and I have a direct deposit inquiry HR service. Again, just kind of walking my way down how this is set up. The reason I bring this up, this is often when you first come into this, when you take your HR CIS test, this is actually one of their questions, if anybody here is chasing that, or when you're initially configuring, understanding oh, I have this HR service and I need to get to the COE. What does this do? This basically makes sure, this helps make sure when you're picking an HR service setting up, I am mapping to the right task table all the way at the end. It's also handy for reporting, delivering types of KPIs, and again, that typical kind of use cases you see around categorization and subcase categorization, or subcategory categorization, excuse me. So what's the schema of an HR case table? So here is what COEs really are. So this is, a screenshot from, if you know the table schema navigator. I have my HR case, which, like all things task related, is extended from the task table. We will never get away from that. But you can see I have all my COEs right here. And this is from a PDI. So this is very much somewhat out of the box. There's a few extras here as well from other plugins I've installed. But you can see, all right, I have distinct task records. So when Joe opens that benefits or that benefits inquiry, we're opening a record here on that benefits case table. We're doing something related to employee relations. It's going to be here. And the big advantage of this is there needs to be separate security as well, especially when I'm touching on that employee relations side, where I want to make sure, like, employee relations teams, they're like SecOps. You can't see my stuff. I don't care who you are. So there is additional security in ACLs wrapped around employee relations, for example, that maybe somebody else in the HR team can't go and see necessarily. And this even goes to also what is these cases referencing. So where are we connecting to those other areas of the platform? You'll notice this is also worth calling out and making sure you check this, because very often people run into the whole, I want to keep track of everybody's reasonable accommodations that they've been approved for. Let's use a custom table. Well, guess what? There's an out-of-box table for accommodations. Like, this is how you discover that. Part of also what I'm here to do is kind of help you know these well-known tables like cases and HR profiles, but also there's a lot of interesting little corners where we can help you store this information and not consume up your custom table counts as well. Now, another piece worth calling out here, you notice the HR case does have a reference to the user. So this is for driving that, who's on that case and whatnot, but it also links to what we call an HR profile. And this is that where I was talking about that separation of data. Now, an HR profile stands alone. Very much, I will keep that data secure. It's not extended from user. So anyone here who's worked with CSM knows contacts, consumers, that's an extension of the user table. So we took the user table and extended it. The HR profile stands by itself. It is not extended from anything. It is its own root table. But it does reference things like user. So that's your linkage. So IT, user, my first name, last name, where my password field's sitting, any of my 80 attributes for bringing in over on that side, that's going to sit on that user table. But there's a reference to HR profile to link the two together. So we know when Joe is logged in and he opens an HR case, we associate it to this HR profile. Like I said, that profile is going to store things like Joe's home address, phone number, and so forth. And this is a key piece to understand about HR service delivery and its data is I am hitting user by reference. Much of what I do in HR cases is driven on the HR profile, which is data only HR can access. It's actually a series of ACLs that checks, is it your profile? Are you somebody working on a case with that profile? Are you basically an HR fulfiller of some kind? Or are you an HR administrator, which is separate from the platform admin? Then you can look at the profile. If you're the IT platform admin, there's a configuration where if you take out HR admin from platform admin, they can't look at other people's HR profiles. So that security model, again, is designed to kind of keep separate, and keep in mind HR likes to kind of have that security silo around their data.
Hey, Joe.
John, did you want to add something in there?
When you sync that your HCM to ServiceNow,
Yeah.
I imagine you're writing some stuff to the HR profile and some stuff to the sys user record, right? Because you'd want to still share.
Yeah, and that very much, I often call this, it's like, what does your legacy look like? Because sometimes people were already syncing their HCM to the user table to begin with and putting some data there and like, oh, now we have HRSD. Do we need to make that move or that change? And that's going to be a data field by data field comparison of how protected it is. Like if you had, the home address on the user table, not ideal. Let's, change the mapping over to that HR profile field. Because I don't imagine, maybe other than shipping information for a laptop, IT doesn't have a lot of use of a home address. And, you could have an employee contest it. Is this information we choose to protect or not? But more importantly, and I've seen customers do this, like my social security number on the user table, big no-no. Like, you don't want that just sitting out there. The HR profile has an encrypted field there, making sure you do it. And again, a lot of out-of-box capability looks to the HR profile for that information, not necessarily directly to sys user.
Yep.
And
And then, okay.
but
Locking down those tables and other
mhm,
sensitive tables. So I guess the HR profile could be sensitive, right? And you want to lock that down
yep.
even from the administrators that of the platform.
Yeah, so that very much that operates by you have your admin, and then there's also an HR admin profile. When you first turn it on, that's one of your contained roles in admin. So they're going to have access to see the HR data and whatnot. If you remove it, so platform admin, so John, your platform admin, we removed HR profile from you. You go look at Joe Fiedler's HR profile. Other than the user fields, which are brought over, you're not going to see any additional information. So you're going to see my first name, last name, work email. Sure, that's also on the user table, and that's how those fields are mapped through. But things like Joe's emergency contacts, Joe's home phone number, nope, that's just going to show as an empty field. You do not have even read access to that.
Michael, did that get your question?
Yeah,
Michael was asking a question, that question. So
So just real quick, in terms of protecting import set tables, because that's something that was a concern raised at one point. Obviously, when the data makes its final destination, that's great, but guess what? They're temporarily for a few days sitting
yeah.
in an import set table. So
And that is
what we
that is not an
what technique
uncommon
was to we
question.
actually put in I don't know what's your opinion on this, but we put in basically a script that runs after the transfer map is run to go and delete out.
That
Just
was
caution for
be my
everybody.
first recommendation because I've had to do that too. And this is depending on the integration too. I mean, you're doing import set tables, so it's probably flat files, CSV uploads, those kinds of things. I'm going to guess SAP. It's usually where I see those. But this is even where I've had teams bring up like they don't even want it in a remote table. Where those are very temporary, and that has a bit of a performance impact if you're bringing in data that way as well. There's also coming down the road, and this is where that safe harbor, slide applies. And I don't know, John, this might be a future topic with the workflow data fabric and zero copy tables. So we're just literally bringing it in and then clearing it out of memory. That's the general gist of it, of how it's been explained to me. But Michael, to your approach, yeah, I'm having to use import sets and flat files. And my first recommendation was, yeah, just making sure you clean up your import set table as soon as it's done and there's no errors on it or nothing you need to resolve. Were there any other questions in chat there, John? And actually, I was going to touch a little more on HCM integration in the next slide, actually.
nope, I think that's it. But why don't we
Okay.
take a pause here, and I just
Yeah.
want to ask a few questions to let you know where people are.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put a little poll up here, really basic one, and let's see if I can launch it, and just to see where everybody is with their meeting poll, where everybody is with their. Here we go. So we'll put that up just to see where everybody's using ServiceNow today, which HCM they're using, because I think you're going to talk a little bit about the difference between an HCM and what we do.
Yeah.
And so this way, it'll give you an idea of the types of people you're talking to.
Yeah, and I'm watching PeopleSoft and Workday be almost neck and neck. Oh, nope, Workday pulling ahead. So
That's funny. I thought I'd see. I feel like I've been seeing about 80% Workday lately. Oh.
I come across, so I cover a lot of public sector. It's a lot of PeopleSoft and actually a fair amount of Workday, not too far behind. They're the two common. There's definitely a healthy mix of SAP and Concur, depending on what they're using it for in the back end, whether it's, for HCM capital, human capital management, or they're doing it for the finance side.
Yep. Yep. And a couple people aren't sure on here, which is fine. I'm going to go ahead and share the results up there, Joe. And any surprises?
So I'm going to say I'm thinking, we have a broader audience here beyond what I typically cover. Honestly, no. Workday is I think the number one market HCM right now. Okay. And Oracle PeopleSoft, they've been around a long time. They extended support on the current version of on-prem PeopleSoft, I think another 8 years. So they're going to be sticking around for a bit. SAP, again, it's kind of sitting where I'd expect it to be as well. Now, this is a good point that you bring up. The thing to talk about here, a lot of things I'm going to touch, especially on this slide here, these are very HCM or HCM-like, okay? One thing ServiceNow is not an HCM. Like Workday, PeopleSoft, SAP, Bamboo, any of those other solutions you have out there, they're great at handling that transactional data. They're designed with really more of that HR, whether it's HR classification folks or those HR workers of mine, but less so the employee. ServiceNow is there to kind of work almost more as that kind of interaction layer. I need to do case, I need to drive a workflow and a process, with basically more user experience and functionality than, let's say, any of these other solutions offer. Many of them have some sort of type of case management, but it tends to be either here's emails back and forth, or it's a very simple stub record and you move through the system that way. In terms of what ServiceNow does, we want to be the interaction layer. So your HCM is to be one of those table legs holding the table up. Your users are all eating dinner on top of the table, which that top surface is ServiceNow. And very much a great example of this is John and I both work at ServiceNow. John, when was the last time you logged into Workday?
Never.
Yeah, we have Workday at ServiceNow. We interact with it through ServiceNow. So we come to our employee portal. I need to update my job title, or my business title. I do that through ServiceNow. When I was first onboarded, everything I did was in ServiceNow, and it was pushed to Workday. So very much when you're talking about those integrations, and HR comes with Workday, the SAP, a lot of integrations actually with its entitlements on top of what you get with like Microsoft and Teams and all that other stuff. You're doing a lot of those standard flows and positions where you can do that push and pull of data where I'm going to task something to somebody in ServiceNow, even like, expense approval, from your SAP systems, or, I'm trying to ask, time off and leave through Workday or Kronos. Those are pushed up to that employee center and you're able to interact with those records. And the biggest thing I want to call out here, too, like when we're looking at that and we're talking about these HCM integrations, we still need those tables to use and store that information. So like that HR profile, you're getting it from your, employee profile over in Workday. You're bringing all that information in and putting it here. And we've talked a lot about it, but this also other things that might come in is your position record. Functionally, this is your job title. I'm an advisory solution consultant. John is a principal enterprise architect. This could be one people have that title. I often see when you're dealing with more classification-based systems, it's more one-to-one, but it can support both. It's also extensible if you need to do any work on this. If you look at this table out of the box, it's very bare bones. This is a table very much meant to be, I'm going to add additional fields for that, information that I need. But then you may also notice there's a job table. This is used to more define job duties that, kind of related granular. So if I had, a job description underneath me, consultant, customer success, admittedly pre-sales is one of my roles as well. I would have those there defined in my job underneath my position. And this is really more of really a Workday and, as I understand, SAP artifact. They're designed to be used there, but it can be used standalone in its own simple way as well. I don't commonly see that used by a lot of customers. A lot go with the HR profile and position and kind of go, if that's good enough, that's enough information that we need.
I got a couple of questions here for you. So
yeah,
I run into sometimes, I've never run into multiple orgs. With the HR module, but I have run into multiple departments or even subsidiaries. Like, how do you treat those when there's like the distributed HR, whether it's at the entire org level or a department level? Or...
So you're talking, let's say I'm a global organization. So I have, an HR for probably likely, UK, parts of EU, different ones there, one for the US, one for Brazil, one for, a couple ones for locations in Asia. You could do that classic, distributed, service desk model where, okay, I want to make sure, like, if I'm going to do this, and this is a bigger decision around, are we one instance or multi-instance? That can get, especially when you're dealing with data compliance. UK, I know, requires all employee information be stored on, somewhere in the UK. So that you need an instance in a UK data center for all your UK employees. UK folks on the call, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Last I checked, I think that was the case. EU has their requirements. I think Singapore has their own unique ones as well. So if you're doing multiple instance, this may turn into, I'm running each one of these together with their own cases, set up that way. And I may be using things like, e-bonding, instance data replication to replicate other information. Like we still may replicate profiles elsewhere where permitted. We may also drive, doing things like specific field encryption or column encryption around who can see it, what, where, based on what role they have and where they go. Because I've even seen it where HR in one division cannot look at HR stuff in another division. So we need to find ways to divide that and to secure that data. And this could be more ACLs, division of by other case types. You can create your own COEs, as many as you like. There's that capability of kind of wrapping a security around. This is very much a it depends question. Most
Hey, Kip, are
customers,
you?
when I see it, it's kind of almost rolls up more to like that data sovereignty requirements. And okay, where does people's data need to live? My teams are functionally separated. That's down to assignment groups. Then the big question comes to, do I need to make unique case types for each team? Frankly, probably not. You could get away with being a little bit more clever with like before query business rules to hide the stuff that's not of concern to them, things like that.
Kip, did that answer your question, or how are you set up today?
Oh, I was just responding to the questions.
Okay.
I'm a ServiceNow solution consultant.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know if that got the questions that they were asking about multi-org.
Okay. Yeah, multi-org with HR especially is a fun one because, just like IT and data security requirements, yep, there's employee and data sovereignty requirements as well.
Does Workday bring the orgs over too? That you get that from the HCM?
I want to say there is, if I remember correctly, and please anyone feel free to fact check me on the documentation. There is a flow designer activity to get org information. That's a matter of where do you want to put it. So this could be the core country table, CMN location, departments, position, job. A lot of that profile is brought over there. And if you're doing specifically org relationships, like I talk a lot with public sector about classification and position control. Joe may roll up to one manager, but Joe's position is managed by another position. There's a whole separation of those two artifacts, kind of an abstract there, where you can create those kinds of relationships on the position table. I can say, position one rolls up to position two, that org building. I know from like Workday, they do like the workforce planning where you can play with a lot of the what ifs and then, implement them into those profiles. That's where, once that's done in Workday, that's where that data would start being pushed or filtered over to ServiceNow based on where you have it mapped.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
How to leverage capabilities for pushing information to other systems.
So going the other way, so I want to push out to ServiceNow. I mean, it's the same thing where, some of the integration hub features, it's like, all right, push this to ServiceNow, or I want to, use these APIs. This still stands where I have specific APIs for to collect up that data. I want to build my own REST API to go out somewhere else. Often I hear this question with Oracle systems. We need to go out to their webhook and kick off a shell process to go process this data. That's Flow Designer. Is really what you're going to be using a lot of that for is I want to structure up this data and then I'm going to go send it somewhere. So you can do that. I don't know if there was a specific context that they were looking for with that question, John, or
No, just in general,
you can push data. If you push data in, you can push data out of ServiceNow, whichever way you want to go.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations, they also use, ESPs and data lakes. I want to have ServiceNow just to push into that as well. That's another function you can do that back and forth for.
And Lou gave us a forget about it. So a little East Coast.
Okay. So, and, kind of touched on this, getting back to what this was, I just wanted to call out, kind of, again, that table structure, the HR profile, is, referencing information on the job and the position, and the job is doing the same to the profile position. Position gets to sit nice and tidy, being just the reference to and not having to worry about where it's going so much out of the box. So, and this is also where you notice we have other things, and I grabbed this from an instance where I actually have what we call our federal table plugin. So any of my federal friends, there's a plugin that brings over the Office of Personnel Management data model. We're continuously developing and adding more sections to that. It's a free plugin. It's about 75 tables. My commercial friends, you're doing a lot of HCM work and you're trying to figure out where to put this table. This may have fields, tables, models you may want to use for also grabbing some of this information. What's designed with public sector more in mind, but it has things like occupation, series, grades, if you're dealing with that kind of HR data model as well. So I was going to take a moment to actually go into an instance here, and talk a little bit more about this data model, because this is also, again, we're talking about a lot of the more well-known, tables here. So I'm going to go this guy around here real quick. But like, this payroll table.
think we have somebody here from NASA too, so that was a good.
Yeah, I saw that. My favorite organization. Actually my first knowledge conference was in Orlando, and I had an extra day, so I actually went out to the Kennedy Space Center. So thank you, NASA. But back to this, looking at the like payroll case, you can see I have specific information that's related to payroll. Like, are we doing account types, business locations? Am I grabbing direct deposit info? From an implementation perspective, I do want to call out, it is expected you're going to be adding fields to these case tables. That is okay. Because you're trying to capture specific data, you're probably going to be using some UI actions to manage it. Now, don't just dump everything on a case table. Think about, does it really need to be here? Does it really need to belong here? Don't put it up at task, please. Don't put it up at core case, please, because that's all going to filter down to your other cases. Understand where it's going to go. And then the same thing from, like, if I'm looking at this from an employee relations perspective, notice I have like fields here for PIPs, as an example, in this out of box setup. And even like, things when things are reported, is there a specific incident? And we're talking about a employee relations, the idea of an altercation, an incident, not an IT incident, just delineate. And this is very much where we want to make sure that, understanding data, as you're adding new columns, you get requests for new services, I may need to add a field, understand and look at these different cases of where they go. Another big one, a fun one I like to call out, is the IT ops cases. I worked for an organization where HRIT was separate from core IT. They did not roll up to the CIO. They rolled up to the CFO. They did not follow ITIL. They followed more of a software development lifecycle model. So they were not even part of our change control. Fun times. But this is where, if you're in an organization where you have something like that, or you have a team that is sometimes segregated from your IT team because they handle HR information, systems, and data, there is a case artifact here where you can run them kind of like almost an incident-like process where, hey, there's a problem, here we go. And you could, even if you needed to, put relationships to incidents if needed, or problems or other stuff, and to follow your prescriptive IT processes as well. The other piece I want to call out, looking specifically at employee relations, there are other tables within this platform, things like interviews, allegations, involved parties, corrective actions. I'm showing this just to kind of show the importance of, when you're starting to go through implementation, when you're starting to understand what's here and you first go live, whether you're doing it yourself, or I highly recommend with a partner, take a look at these schema tables. If you're the platform owner, if you're the enterprise architect, take a little bit of time to ask about this, because this will save you from, we need to use a custom table from that. Maybe not. Another common one I get is, we want labor union information. Well, guess what? There are labor union tables. There are benefits tables. There's tables to store reasonable accommodations. There's a lot of information here. You can look at the documentation and just see the big flat list, but sometimes it's easier to see it in context, or I'm very much a visual person. I want to see, the labor unions and go look at the schema map of, what all of this information, actually looks like for me. So I'm going to go hop into just this real quick. Oh no, I clicked the wrong link. Beat it. So if I want to show everything that's referenced and together on this guy, here we go. But like you can see, I have a nice little tidy labor union table talking things like about my contracts, my chapters, and which employees are a member of it. We go over here, we'd even see, oh, this routes back to the HR profile, for example. And I actually think I even have the HR profile here. So again, it's just, this is kind of just walking through different like kind of facets of where we're looking at these different data models or pieces of information. This is how I check, kind of understanding these relationships of, a lot of this kind of runs full circle, like my HR profile goes to union membership, or my case coming back to maybe my reasonable accommodations, things like that. And this is where HR is collecting information about person. In IT, you're collecting information about systems. You rely very heavily on that CMDB as to what everything is out there. You're relying even on assets assigned to people and things like that. In the same sense, with human capital management systems, we're bringing in data about the person, information about them, where they're located, and so forth. Same mentality, just different data. On a different
Joe,
go ahead.
On the HR profile table, what are some of the tabs on there?
Some of the tabs. So actually, many of these tabs, actually, let's go take a look at it directly.
Yeah, Katie was asking
the
tabs and where that data comes from.
Let's take a look at Miss Mara Reinhardt. Now understand, this is a demo environment. I have done a little configuration. So if you're looking at an out of the box version, mine might look a little different. Actually, this is my PDI one. This so a little more here, but like here's like where we have these tabs. This is another table that we have relationship source. So who is your beneficiary, based upon your insurance? So this would be coming from your benefits system, tracking who is covered. And the reason why this is here, if I'm working a case as an HR person, I want this information to be quickly referenceable. So if I'm in that HR agent workspace, I can see this information. I don't have to go log into another system to go check it out, saving that time. The other piece of this is we may drive workflow automation. Oh, if a user asks this question on the catalog item, I may set up a flow to just go check their HR profile and spit it back at them. Or in virtual agent or now assist, any of those types of interfaces. We have the information here. We can now push it back to the user. We're not involving a person. We're letting the platform do the work for us, and everyone can work on more meaningful work in projects and missions.
Thank you. Do you have any information about the jobs tab or employee documents?
So
I see
the
employee
jobs
documents
tab,
on ours, yeah.
yeah, so the jobs tab that's that part of, so you have your position, which is your job title. So again, this is that what I was describing, kind of like your role. And this also has where very much I can be in one position, but I can have a job where as a consultant had a start date and even an end date, but my title stayed the same. This is very much more like this was really designed with Workday in mind for that. It was kind of that use case where this was originally born out of because they have this data structure they use. So this is where if I want to talk about a job, so I'll even go back to my IT service desk tech days. One of the jobs I had was exec support was one of my jobs, but my position was service desk site lead. So that's where I could say if I'm defining out specific activities in your role, specific job titles, who it's related to, you're able to kind of codify and keep track of all that information. And you can do it manually. It's pretty light on the business rules. You may want to add additional ones just to protect data, keep it in sync a certain way and whatnot. This is commonly what I've seen if people start to use the job title just in and of by itself.
And no, there's a follow-up on that. Could job support personnel actions?
Oh, like a personal action request, a PAR or a PARF or an RPA or an RPO or an RTF.
Yes.
Yeah, you very much could. Actually, I actually have a demo of it in another environment where you're using basically actually the position table. So every position has a classification. I might be able to look at it in Harry. So like this idea behind.
And
I'm
we are
running a
using the
formal-
position table.
Yeah, but my example is a position table. I've seen other implementations where they did leverage the job table. This is very much into that. How is it configured? That art of possible. This is not what an out-of-box position table looks like. This is what it would look like either integrated with an HCM. Notice I have all of these other fields with position numbers, units, all these authorized equivalency, all these data points. But this is what for me is like a class and pay analyst. Hey, I want to fill the head count, who owns it? Where's the funding coming from? What accounting code is it with? This is a very art of possible example of what this could look like. Where I want to bring this information, I can analyze it, I can drive workflow behind it. If we have a rec for a new headcount, one time of creating it, we create a whole approval process. This is where you can build those workflows to drive your automation. This can even be driven transactionally from Workday. Once it comes in, I push information over to Workday, it's approved, let's go create the position. Now we can go start recruitment and come full circle back to ServiceNow for onboarding.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorite demos, by the way. Thank you. So I know we're coming close to time, John. We've had a lot of eager questions. I appreciate that. Do you want me to jump to, I'm going to say we have a choice to pick here. I can either jump to the common service data model, or we can talk about implementation security, maturity. Which do you think we should hit in the next 5 minutes here?
Why don't we go to being we're on HR and we can mention the CSDM next time. CSDM. Okay. I got CSDMs in there, so let's do that one.
All right, we'll do some of the common service data model ones.
Okay.
All right, let me hop back to the PowerPoint here real quick. So, I mean, for a lot of you architects, you're trying to think, where I'm trying to figure out where does HR commonly land within that common service data model. So I want to see, just a quick overview for any of you who may not be familiar with this term. So basically, this is a standard set of definitions across the platform to framework out our data model, often related to CMDB, but basically it is a standard. How do we name everything in the platform, determine where it goes, and how do I plan for it on the platform? That is your high level, 10-second overview of what is CSDM. And we'll share these slides, so these will be here for review as well. So often in HR implementations, what happens is This is the full eye chart of CSDM. We're not on 5 officially yet, are we, John? I think it's still in review.
No,
Yeah.
almost.
Okay, I just want to make sure I had the right slide. But a lot of folks with HR implementations, they focus on that bottom bar, foundations. All right, cool. You have users, company, business unit, where they're located, what groups they're in, done. I don't need to do anything more for HR. But I challenge the question. We saw a little bit of that demonstration. I have a catalog of services. They're codified by topics and categories. So maybe business offerings and business services. And they're supported on, like your Workday runs application services and it has configuration items related to it. It's sitting in a data center or a cloud somewhere. And, if I, go back and remove the whole shading, even as an enterprise architect, we're talking about, from the business service to business capabilities and business apps, what are we really doing from that holistic viewpoint? So you're kind of doing yourself a disservice of just going to foundation and stopping. This is what I see most customers do. Now, in our documentation, and there is if you have service portfolio management, there is an SPM plugin for HR. And this is actually where I drove much of that diagram from, where, all right, I have my HR service and record producers. Those are service offerings. My topic details, are those specific services we're calling out. And this is a plugin that we have that maps it by default. But then you can go through and configure these HR services are mapped this way. Are these business services? If it's an HRIT service offering, is it a technical service? So you can go through that exercise of mapping this out, like with a tool like SPM, and determining where is this going to land in that common service data model. So at a high level, like I said, you're kind of doing yourself a bit of a disservice of just stopping at foundation. These pieces still fit. And it is, again, just like anywhere, if you land anywhere or start anywhere on this map, you can eventually work your way to the rest of the map as well. That is the 2-minute summarization of my talk track there, John. But it was
Awesome.
mostly the reminder around HR does fit into that common service data model. We could, it is not the exception. It is still part of the role. You might just have to kind of turn your thinking 90 degrees to get it, to understand where it's going to fit.
And depending on alignment, you probably could map all the way up to the COE with the service portfolio.
Oh, absolutely.
How you want to structure those.
Yeah, actually, when I was making the slide last night, I was debating, do I do COE service portfolio? And this is often sometimes with CSDM too, we get in the debate of what is defined as what. So I didn't want to open that can of worms on this call if I could help it.
And we went through that before. Can you just do Workday for me and give me a CSDM model? It's like everybody's Workday is different, right? I've done probably 20 Workdays and they're all different because
and it's even like back in my ITSM days, it's like, we got into big arguments about what is a technical service offering versus a business service.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that as well.
Yeah, always shaking out where they live. Sometimes they're both too, which was really confused people. Yeah.
Yep. So it is a framework. Get it to fit for you and carry on with your day.
Well, thanks, Joe. This is awesome. This has really helped me too. So I selfishly picked Joe because I wanted to learn more about HR as well. So appreciate that.
And for the topics we missed, John, not that I'm trying to sell myself here, I'm happy to come back and we can cover over the implementation maturity model as well.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's